up the price of the product so that your citizens will have to pay much higher prices. You want to have the choices that you can decide whether it's much cheaper to get it from the UK or whether it's much cheaper to get it from the US. So some of the examples we get is, for example, like books. In Hong Kong, as well as in Australia, Singapore, New Zealand, a lot of those places, you can get both the US version and also the UK version. This is basically the first installment of Harry Potter. So this, on the left is the UK version, because you got the Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. On the right is the US version, because you got the Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And so this is a good example of how a lot of those countries will import both versions, because some of them will be much cheaper, and they also provide a different type of language because of the different spelling with respect to UK English and also US English. But it's quite important for them to do that because there are different people having the different interests, and also they want to buy things at a different price level. And so it's quite important for them to do that. But that would also be quite similar to what we have with respect to DVDs, because it can be much cheaper if you import the same movie from the US as compared to UK, and so a lot of those countries might be willing to do that. So the concern for a lot of those competition authorities is that by having region code, you can actually raise the price because you can determine where they can import the product from. And so that's not to the advantage of the citizens right there. The third thing I think is important is about the civil rights. And so if you're thinking about those diasporic communities here in the US or elsewhere, trying to teach their kids the local language, that's always very difficult. And a lot of times you need to bring in movies, you need to bring in books from other places or computer software in order for them to do it. I was talking to a colleague from, who was born in Israel but now teaching in the US. He always talks about how difficult it is for him to honor both the region code and also teach the kids the language that he wants to cover, because a lot of those products he needs is just not available in the country. So a lot of times he has to import the products from Israel or from other places, and yet it's not playable within the DVD player or the computer at home. And one of the difficulties is about learning a language. Another example that's actually more relevant, not just to the diasporic communities, is to a lot of the people here. One of the benefits of having DVDs is that we can actually use it to learn foreign languages. But when you think about DVDs we got, it really depends on what language you have. If you're talking about English, French, and Spanish, you get it. If you talk about German, unfortunately, no. If you look at a lot of those movies, this is not included as part of the subtitles. With respect to classical music, with respect to operas, you sometimes get German. But with respect to a lot of Hollywood movies, you just don't get it. And so for those people who want to use DVDs to actually learn the language, unfortunately, it depends on what type of language you're talking about. And final thing I want to focus on is about censorship. And so if you, one of the very big issues is about how we're actually using some of those region codes to help promote censorship in other places. And this actually makes a lot of sense when you think about China having only region 6. So if the distributors and also the movie producers are very concerned about the censorship regulations in China, they can always issue a highly censored version in region 6. But at the same time, you are taking away the opportunity for the Chinese to view the original version so that they can learn what's going on there. So to some extent, region code can actually promote censorship in a lot of places. That's not true just for China, but also for a lot of Middle Eastern countries, Ukraine, Russia, a lot of those places where there's a much more severe information control environment. But it's not only limited to those countries. There are different level of acceptance with respect to sexual content in the US as compared to Europe. Eyes Shut is a very good example where the European version actually show a little bit more of the sexual content than what you can get within the US version. And so for those people who want to see the real original creations by Kubrick, they probably want to get the European version because that's more in line with the director's conception of the movie as compared to the toned-down version that is widely available in the US. So to some extent, the censorship can go in different directions. So what are the solutions? There are two different solutions I want to suggest. The first one is that, well, we can actually think about how a lot of those other products that are relying on the fact that there's no region code. So they have the region 0, so so-called region-free products. So classical music is a very good example. A lot of people like it, not just because it's classical music, but also because if you actually make the purchase, you don't need to worry about where you're playing it. You can play it in the US, you can play it in Europe, or you can play it in Asia. There's a very interesting story about how some of the DVD have been brought up to the space station by the space shuttle Atlantis. And one of the very interesting questions is, well, what they're going to bring up to a space shuttle, to a space station, because you got both astronauts from the US as well as astronauts from Russia. If you're going to bring the DVDs from region 1, that means the Russian astronauts may not be able to play it. Luckily, they've decided to bring in the region 0 DVDs up there. And so that means it's playable by all astronauts from the different countries. A lot of companies, when they're thinking about intellectual property issues, they always think about the digital strategy. But what I'm saying here is that it's also quite important for us to think about the global strategy. And a global strategy is not just about piracy or counterfeiting. It's also about a different type of demands, different type of expectation, and also different type of lifestyle or consumer preferences. This is a good example of what you can find on the website from BBC, and so it's actually very exciting. You can get a lot of different BBC productions that you want to watch. So if you are a visiting professor from the UK, but you are teaching here, you can go onto a BBC and watch a lot of those TV programs. Unfortunately, this is based on a different region. So when you click on the programs you want to see it, they will tell you that, no, you cannot see it because you're outside the region. So there are different services that the companies provide, for example, My Expat Tally, that will allow you to actually watch those TV programs. And I was talking to a visiting professor, and he told me that, well, he actually loves all those services because all he needs is to pay a subscription fee, and then he can watch all those programs that he otherwise would be able to do that in the UK. So here is a good example of the fact that this person is willing to pay a subscription fee to do it, and yet BBC is not willing to do it, to offer the service that's available for them. I can think of a number of reasons. One is that they might want to release it through BBC America, so it might not necessarily be the best time for them to do it. Another reason may be how they structure licensing rights. They might get the rights in the UK, but not the rights in the US. There are a lot of complications, but I think those are the issues that a lot of the rights holders might want to consider, because increasingly a lot of people want to have a global environment so that they can watch it wherever they travel. And I think that's very important. When you think about the latest technology with respect to cyber locker or cloud computing, that's also quite important, because it's no longer limited to one geographical region. People want to have access in different places, and that's especially true if the server is actually located outside the country. And so I think that is something that a lot of the rights holders need to take into consideration. The second solution that I want to talk about is it's important to have the right to hack or circumvent the region code. And so this is actually not new. This has been discussed by commentators. For example, Andrew Shapiro has the Control Revolution talking about the importance of right to hack. And at that time, he's talking mainly about digital rights management, about technological protection measures, how it's going to prevent people from engaging in fair use, people from using the product even though it has been lawfully purchased. What I'm going to argue is not just about the right to hack, but also is based on human rights. We need to have a human rights-based access right. And the reason behind is for some of the things that I talked about early on with respect to civil rights, with respect to the consumer preferences, with respect to the need to actually avoid censorship. And to some extent, you can actually tie it to the right to culture, right to development, right to education. That is human rights-based. And I think that's quite important. And there are a number of ways we can do it. One, we can set it up as a defense so that you can always assert it before a court and saying that I have to circumvent the technology for this particular reason. Or you can make it as an access right that they have it as a legal entitlement. You can also follow what the UK has been doing by filing some paperwork. You can actually get the right holder to provide a version that's not covered by the technological protection measures. There are a number of ways to do it, but I think it's very important for us to think about the possibility of making the products available for those who actually have legitimate reason to watch the content, as compared to those who just want to get it free of charge because they don't want to pay for it. And so let me conclude here. What I talk about here is talking about the region code right here. And this keeps on changing, and I think that is actually quite interesting because this is the picture, what we got based on the Blu-ray DVDs. But that is no longer include the 6 different regions that I talked about early on right here. We actually only got 3 different regions. So it's unclear as to whether the technology will continue to evolve to a point that will go into a region 0 mode for a lot of the products. But when you think about computer technology, you always remember the cycle when we have technological protection measure and then no technological protection measure and then go back there. And so it'll be quite interesting to see how it's going to evolve. And the other thing I think is also quite important is about how a lot of people is actually using a lot of the different content to try to, different platform to try to view the content, but that is not necessarily the easiest. For example, when you think about using the region free player, now there's a new technology that says that, well, you cannot have access because this is not the type of player that is playable. That is usually included in Blu-ray DVDs. For YouTube, they also do certain type of regulations saying that, well, it is not available in your country. And one of the reasons why I think it's important for us to think about this issue is that what I presented earlier is not just limited to DVDs, but also it covers, for example, YouTube, it covers cloud computing, it covers a lot of the latest technology. And that's why I think it's a quite important issue for us to address those issues. And one of the very interesting development recently is about how Google as well as other companies are complaining about a lot of the technological restrictions in different countries. So they are now doing a report based on how free it is and how supportive it is for cloud computing, and that is also quite interesting, and that shows how we are actually not that far away from our early debate about all those geographical restrictions or whether we can have national sovereignty and also border control at the same time with respect to a digital environment. So I've stopped here. Thank you very much.